Alright, sit down and listen, because today we're going to be talking about the ground. The freaking dirt. Touching grass is cool and all, but if not for the soil beneath the grass, we wouldn't have the power to touch it. And besides, I don't want to talk about touching grass. Every single time Rillaboom's Grassy Surge activates against my Excadrill and friends, I begin to feel uncomfortable. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Today, we're gonna learn how to play mono freaking ground, baby. But first, before we talk about Gen 9 Monotype, I should inform those just tuning in of a few things. First, Terastallizing is banned from Monotype, because it's way too weird in this metagame and typically unhealthy. Secondly, there is no mention of Ursaluna Bloodmoon in this video, because it has since been banned from Monotype for being too unhealthy for the metagame. And thirdly, I don't know, Luna's World's in the description, and also sometimes I stream on Twitch. Which, I don't know why I haven't been telling people outside of the Discord. Which I should probably link in the description with my Twitch that I am streaming. Also, be sure to subscribe, like, turn on notifications, y'all know the YouTube drill. So, mono ground is like weird and debatably matchup fishy. But the best way to describe mono ground is that you're playing kind of like either hyper offense or some sort of weird balance team depending on what route you want to go to build it. Obviously, as is mono ground, you really like seeing sand up, but not for too long. No. You see, smooth rock and damp rock, being the sand and rain extenders, are banned. You cannot play them. If you could, sand and rain would actually just dominate the format. So this means that you can't slap a smooth rock on Hippowdon and let Excadrill do all the work. Now, if you want to know, in my opinion, the main difference between a balanced version of sand and a hyper offense version of sand, it comes down to one main question. Are you running like Ting-Lu or Clodsire? If you're not running either of those and instead chose to play 6 offensive ground types, you're playing HO. But if you wanted Clodsire for its ability to get toxic spikes on the field, or Ting-Lu for its ability to sit there and litter the field with pebbles and Legos, then you're playing hazard stacking balance. At least with how I see it. It basically depends on how much you're willing to try to slow a game down. Now me? I technically am on balance, because I'm on Clodsire, but that's a conversation for later. The win condition remains the same, and that's to pave the way for Excadrill. It's just about how fast you want to get there. The pros. This is going to be a lot shorter than Mono Dragon. Heck, a lot of pro sections from here on won't be as lengthy as Mono Dragon, because Mono Dragon is like the cream of the crop, best stuff ever. But the other monotypes definitely got stuff going for them, and Mono Ground is no different. I love this monotype, and playing it has been a lot of fun. So, what are the pros? Well, weather. Ultimately, having weather up is typically advantageous. Being able to deny Torkoal's sun, Pelipper's rain, or Alolan Ninetales' sand is always a treat. If you can actually kill Ninetales and Pelipper early into the match, you can cut off their sweeping attempts with your Hippowdon sand. For Pelipper, this is easier said than done. But for Ninetales, all it takes is an Iron Head from your mole. So, for the most part, you're pretty advantageous in the weather wars, only really struggling with the raindrops that melt away your flesh on contact. Sand is an excellent weather regardless, enabling chip damage on enemies that goes well with your rocks and spikes, and it brings your opposition just 6% closer to kill range from the Excadrill you have waiting in the back. Being one of the best offensive types in the games has its perks, you know? Fire, rock, steel, poison, and electric are all types that want nothing to do with you, with a steel type of some kind being on most mono teams to help you with fairy and dragon types. This means that their anti-meta measures are ripe for the taking thanks to your access to Stab Earthquake. Simply being good against steel can turn certain matchups into a 5v6, and that makes it all the easier for you to push your advantage. You do have some variety, that's for sure, and plenty of solid, strong ground types that all do pretty different things. Stuff like Gliscor, Hippowdon, Excadrill, Mamoswine, Sandy Shocks, Landorus are all pretty neat options to have access to. In terms of the quality of your Pokemon, you have access to various ways to get hazards on the field, and you have access to the best rapid spinner in the game, Great Tusk. Being able to flex your Great Tusk is something only one other monotype can do, and simply having it makes your Mono Dark matchup that much better. You love this guy, even if he's weak to flying types. Your special attacking offense is carried by Landorus Incarnate and Sandy Shocks. But think about that. Your special attacking offense is carried by Landorus Incarnate. Yeah, you're pretty well off. And for defense, you got Clodsire, Ting Lu, and Gliscor. You're doing pretty great out there. Just don't be in on an ice type move. Sand, powerful offenses, excellent forms of hazard control, defense, and overall versatility. You're doing pretty well for yourself. You have incredibly strong strengths, but you also have incredibly horrendous weaknesses. Let's talk about them. The cons. Ooh boy, where do I start with this one? You see, ground types have the issue of being weak to stuff. Go figure, right? But the weakness of this monotype in particular are pretty hard to play around. Let's go over certain matchups and where one could find themselves struggling. Mono flying is a pain. Yeah, you have access to Mamoswine and Sandy Shocks, and that's fine and dandy. That's great. And, well, who really cares? They have access to their own Landorus and Gliscor, who while your Sandy Shocks to death, and then your Mamoswine finds itself flailing and struggling to do meaningful damage against Skarmory and Corviknight, who can threaten it with Body Press. Your checks to mono flying are fringe, and them being all immune to your stab ground attacks is a pain. There are going to be times when whether or not you actually beat Landorus Incarnate comes down to the Landorus speed tie, which is pretty terrifying. More so for you than your opponent. Bug. Bug isn't too bad. While they resist your ground stab, which is rough, you have Excadrill with Rock Slide. Or, if you're that committed, Gliscor dual Wing Beat and Rhyperior Rock Stab. However, I debate that the matchup still favors mono Bug. Kinda 55-45 their favor. And that's entirely because your only special wall is Clodsire. Where is this going? If you get unlucky and lose that Clodsire in any way, or it gets low enough, Volcarona just breaks the rest of your team usually, unless you built specifically to make sure that doesn't happen. Ice. Ice is a weird one, where sometimes you can win outright with Excadrill being Excadrill, and Ironhead spamming your opponent to death, or sometimes that one turn that Alolan Ninetales got to set up screens is enough to, getting Cloyster, who will get Shell Smash off on most Pokemon you're running, and then ruin you. Basically, be careful if you see Cloyster in your team preview for Mono Ice, and be glad that they banned Chien-Pao. Water. Ground types are abysmal against mono water. This type is basically the entire reason you're either on Torterra, who could get clipped by the obvious Ice Beam they always have on hand, or exactly Clodsire, who you're gonna have on Water Absorb, or at least bluff it, just to make sure they don't click it on you willy-nilly. And Clodsire by itself can sometimes just be enough versus certain water teams. If the teams are bad. If the mono water team is good, they have Wellspring Ogerpon, and you just die because Clodsire Poison Jab didn't poison, and now they can set up Swords Dance and kill you. That didn't happen to me at all. Please ignore the sweep on screen. Grass. You are glad that mono grass is just not common, because the quality of grass may as well be carried by Rillaboom, Ogerpon, and Meowscarada. Everything else is alright at best, like Superior, Sinistra, and Hydrapple. And then everything else is Rotom Mow for the flying matchup? But if you do run into mono grass, which luckily I never did, what's your Rillaboom switch in? What's your Water Ogerpon answer? Oh wait, you get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir! So yeah, you have one really awkward matchup in Bug, a kinda bad matchup in Ice, and then you have terrible matchups in Water, Flying, and Grass. The former two will actually come up. You have nightmares about Rillaboom, the opposing Landorus Therian and its best friend Corviknight, and then that Ogre with its silly mask. But other than that, With water and flying being good and somewhat common, being a mono ground player becomes very matchup fishy. But hey, when you're winning, you're winning. So, like last time, I'm going to go over the more notable Pokemon and then some fringe options. I'm going to go over what they do before putting my team and a sample team on the screen, and then showing off what the team could do in a montage, and not just one game where I lose. I threw all of my losses at you in the weaknesses session. I get to show off the wins in a bit. But first, Landorus Incarnate. Landorus Incarnate is a Life Orb plus Sheer Force abuser who aims to typically try to get up a nasty plot in the mid to late game versus a weakened team and endgames on the spot. Sometimes, the plot isn't even necessary. But you're also better safe than sorry. With Sludge Wave to hit Grass and Fairy, Psychic to hit those pesky fighters, and Grass Knot to show other grounds and the occasional water what's good, Landorus can be very terrifying. Clodsire. It's a special wall that can kinda switch into grass maybe, and with Water Absorb is your water type switch in. It specializes in spreading poison via toxic spikes, toxic and poison jab, and will be seen holding black sludge and spamming recover for recovery. Stealth rocks and spikes are options too, making an excellent hazard setter. Gliscor. Thanks to its defensive prowess, it can make your winning matchups even more winning by setting up hazards or just Swords Dance sweeping, all while recovering thanks to Poison Heal. In return, it makes your bad matchups even more atrocious. Great Tusk. Your main way to remove hazards, and it's also one of your most consistent ways to chunk the opposing Landorus if you can catch it on the switch, because sometimes it feels like you live and die on Ice Spinner. Play it however you want. Iron Treads. Just use Excadrill. I mean it. Volt Switch momentum is nice and all, but it just isn't worth it in my opinion. But if you are curious, it can spin, it can set up hazards, it can pivot, and with Steel Beam, it can feign itself to get you into a different mon. Hippowdon. It's a physical wall that gets up sand for you, can set up rocks, and with Whirlwind, it can phase out setup mons. You live and die off this hippo, and that hippo lives and dies off Slack Off. Excadrill. A choice-spended Excadrill is how you win. With the limited turns of sand per setup, you gotta make the most out of it. Don't Swords Dance. Just slap the band on there and use Earthquake, Iron Head, and Rock Slide. For the fourth move, Rapid Spin just in case. Other options include Lando T, Sandy Shocks, Mamoswine, Garchomp, and Toedscroll. You got options upon options, even if some of them are gimmicks or play very similarly to other Pokemon here. But hey, it's your team, and you get to flavor it however you want. Balance, offense, spike stacking, or, if you're really coping, Sand Stall. But don't do that. Don't do that. Sand doesn't last long enough for that to work, and Gliscor and Claude can only do so much for you. Now, here's a mono ground sample I found on the Smogon forums made by Jakem, which uses eject button Hippowdon to pivot into good options, and gravity Sandy Shocks to tell mono flying it isn't safe. That, personally, is my favorite tech I've seen in a while. And here's the mono ground team I made. I had Ting Lu over Sandy Shocks at first, which you'll see in some replays, and I didn't even remotely think about Mamoswine being a ground type. And by the time I remembered, I already spent 2 hours getting replays. And now, let's get cooking. Hit the music.